Check Podcasts.
Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to Chamber Chats, coming to you, as always, from the podcasting studios here at Czech Media Group. Czech is one of our chamber champions. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I live and I work in the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking nations, known to us as Songhees and Esquimalt. Chamber Chats is made possible by the support of Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union, who are changing what banking can do for people, for community, and for the planet. The day that we're recording this today is one of those kind of gray, dark, rainy kind of days that we get here in the fall and the winter time. And it's weather that can affect people's mood, it can affect people's attitude, and it can certainly impact their mental health. We want to talk about that today because we're going into the time of year when we deal with this kind of weather, but also we're going into a season that holds great expectation for a lot of people as we get into the holiday season. So a couple of people here to talk with us about that. First of all, Jonny Morris joins us once again. Jonny is the CEO of the Canadian Mental Health Association for BC. Jonny, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for having me back on Chamber Chat.
You bet. You're joining us from beautiful downtown Trail, BC today, because you're on the road doing your thing. Also joining us today is Chris Forrester, who's the executive director of an organization called the ICMHA, the Island Community Mental Health Associations. How are you?
Great, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about that. What is your organization? Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Bruce. So Island Community Mental Health, or ICMHA, has been in Victoria for about 69 years, and we are a provider of diverse community mental health services. And community mental health is a spectrum of services, but we offer programs that work on skills, connecting people to the community, getting people in front of what we refer to as recovery coaches to work on specific personal challenges or goals. We have groups. We also run for BC Housing, affordable housing sites for individuals and families. And we offer licensed care for folks that require 24/7 care for profound and persistent mental health challenges. So we do a lot of things. We offer kind of the full slate of services, and we've been doing it for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, but a lot of us think that the mental health concerns have only been more recent, but you're almost 70 years your organization has been doing that.
Correct. Yeah. And so the community's response to mental health has obviously changed greatly over the years, but there's really been a push and a trend towards more community-based services post deinstitutionalization, where people with mental health were released from places like Riverview into the community. And in so doing, folks just needed more support. And so over the years, we developed and dedicated more support to the community.
Yeah. Jonny, CMHA, Canadian Mental Health Association, has been around for a long time. How long has that organization been working?
Well, we share the same acronym here as almost as without the I. We've been in Canada for almost 105 years now, as a national federation. And I work at the provincial office, so a lot of our programs and our services are provincial in nature. They're kind of delivered remotely. Our depression care program, our positive parent training programs. We do a lot of work in the space of education and training. And then also we have a policy mandate. So every day we campaign and fight for change in the mental health systems across BC, just so that people can thrive and have good mental health.
As I said off the top, Jonny, we are in that time of year right now where people who have some vulnerability around their mental health are impacted by the weather. Tell me what kind of a factor that is at this time of year. I mean, it's in a way, it's almost palpable, but people do have issues because of the weather, right?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bruce. There's definitely a proportion of folks, me included, who get impacted by the change, particularly in the availability of light. So, with daylight savings and all of that, we typically have less light available in the day for a whole host of reasons, cloud cover, but also our latitude and the length of days. And light is so important for mood and how we feel. And so there's a proportion of us who actually are clinically impacted by a lack of light. And we do things like we have mood lamps and we do all sorts of other things to keep our mood going. And I think generally for people who may not have a clinical impact when it comes to light, definitely can feel a sense of malaise or a sense of melancholy and sadness in and around this time of year for a whole host of reasons that may or may not be clinical in nature.
So, Chris, I want to talk about the holiday season stuff, the great expectation rather that goes around the gift giving and the partying and the eating and all that stuff. That's a thing, right? Like, what can we do now to start mitigating the impact of those feelings?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's one that so many people face as the holiday season draws near. And I think a lot of that's around family challenges. Not everyone is connected. There's certainly issues of poverty, ability to afford the gift giving, and it's all exacerbated by a sense of isolation as well, and the seasonal affective disorder. Or challenges that Jonny spoke of as well. So the things that we can do are get connected. I mean, that's the first step. So much of community-based mental health is really revolves around relationships. So the more that we're feeling impacted by the season, the more that challenges us to get connected. So for folks that might need services, that means looking at what's offered over the holiday season. For instance, Island Community Mental Health is open throughout the season and throughout that gap between Christmas and New Year's as well, right? Just so that we can meet people where they're at, and so that there's an open door for people to connect with, as we know that services get more challenging to access as well.
And Johnny, this is a time when Chris mentioned the pressures possibly of finances. Money is a factor. You're going to be in a circumstance where you have to hang out with family you may not be all that crazy about. So that's starting to build up right now. What would be your direction to people that are starting to feel some of that seasonal anxiety?
Chris's advice is great in and around getting connected. I don't think we can underestimate the impact of a cost of living crisis and people really finding it difficult to make ends meet. Financial struggles are a huge source of stress for many, and can have a real impact upon mental health. Often getting to grips with what's happening in one's financial life, reaching out to great services like the Credit Counseling Society in Victoria, being preemptive and knowing what's in your control and what's out of your control can really be important steps to mitigate some of that stress and anxiety. All of us can get caught up in this season and other seasons and find ourselves overextended when it comes to the financial implications of this. One of the other tips we've given over the years, and Chris mentioned family, we often have, as you said, a great sense of expectations, like a feeling of duty or a feeling that we must be with family. And for some, that can be really, really stressful. And we've often encouraged folks to really do a mental health check-in with themselves, see where they're at, and try and be in control of the decisions they want to make in and around this season. Where are they going to experience most peace, most balance, most joy, most calm, and to try and map a path towards those goals for themselves, and again avoid being swept up in those expectations that can be really, really stressful.
Yeah. There isn't kind of a one size all fit solution for this, but we want to talk about how this is impacting people of a certain age, people of a certain culture, people of a certain gender. We're going to talk about that next. On Chamber Chats today, we're talking all about the season in which we are living, and we're heading into the holiday season. There's great expectation around that. People's mental health comes into challenge. A couple of guests with us today. Chris Forrester is the executive director of the Island Community Mental Health Association. So, Chris, what's the specific difference between men and women at this time of year? Is there something that manifests more with one gender than another?
Great question, Bruce. And if there is, there certainly isn't an answer that I know. Jonny, what about yourself?
That was a great pivot there, Chris. I would say, we want to be careful with generalizations around gender at this time of year. I think it would be fair to say that there are potentially unfair expectations around what kinds of labor gets performed in households depending on your gender. And I think we've got to be thoughtful, depending on how your household is made up and what genders are in your household, to answer your question, to think through, like, how can we share the lift of the season, right? So is it relying on one, irrespective of gender, is the season, the meals, the gift buying, the decorations, does that typically fall to a particular person or a particular member of the household? And to maybe think through, is there a way to share that load? We all kind of get caught in these routines in our families that can lead to one or two people bearing the brunt of meeting all those expectations, Bruce, that you described in your initial question. I think being intentional and having a bit of a plan and reflecting upon the last season can be really, really helpful to make sure that the load is shared more equitably in households across the province.
And to add to that, what really resonates for me as well is what Jonny mentioned earlier is not getting caught up in the commercial expectation of the season as well. It can really destabilize people. They can feel they're not meeting the societal standards that are out there. And so, again, looking at the makeup of your own household, what works well for you, and grounding yourself in your own values and what's meaningful for yourself at this time of year. So.
And Chris, your organization does things that are specific to age groups too. For example, working with young people and youth. Talk about that for a little bit.
Well, we don't specifically work with young people and youth. We do work with seniors, however.
Okay.
And so I think that's another a really important service, because we know that aging adults experience more isolation and more loneliness, and that's exacerbated at this time of year as well. And the feelings of depression and despair are more prevalent among that age group throughout the holiday season. And so again, what we do is provide a place for people to congregate, to create relationships, to share in some of the holiday celebration that's available. And we do that pretty consistently over the course of the holiday season.
And Jonny, I believe you guys do some youth programs though, don't you?
Yeah, we have a strong focus actually post this holiday season. So there's a number of holidays being celebrated in the new year. We work with a number of partners, and we've actually got a great local support in Highland Pacific Golf, and Jeff Palmer's crew out there. He does an annual golf tournament for us to support our youth mental health summit. And so it's interesting after the season and the dust has settled to get scores of Greater Victoria high school youth in a room to talk about the state of the union when it comes to mental health and well-being. And I do think, when we think about generations, and Chris did a great job speaking about, some of the challenges that older adults might experience. I do think nowadays when we hear from young people in our programming who are worried about a whole bunch of things, including climate change and the future of the world and global conflict, they're also pretty much done with stigma. They're ready to talk about these issues, and they want stigma to be pushed out of the way. I do think about young people, the impact of social media, the need to kind of measure up and kind of be a particular way in and around this season. It really goes back to the theme of your questions, Bruce, of expectations. And, we as caring adults, and I think about the advice we might offer parents and caregivers, just to disrupt some of those expectations a bit and have good channels of communication, again, to avoid getting caught up and swept up in something that might not bring a lot of joy if we're really driving to achieve perfection at this time of year.
Yeah. You talked about things like social media, the things that we're consuming in media and that sort of thing. Chris, I'll go to you with this question first of all. Keeping an eye on the news cycle these days, there are things that are reported on a regular basis, world events that are happening that are very disturbing for people. What kind of thing can people do to sort of balance their understanding of that in their intake and their consumption of it?
I think first and foremost is starting to build an understanding of the hyper-connected way in which we live our lives through social media, through Zoom, being on text communication, and then really trying to work to unplug as often as possible and connect in one-to-one in-person relationships, talk about the things that are causing concern, and really start processing that in a grounded way. Also noting that some of the implications that have come out of the last 2 weeks regarding election cycles have real and meaningful impacts in people's lives, and so there's true fears out there that people really need to talk about.
Something else that people, of course, find very upsetting is when they see something happening. Mental illness and addictions are on full public display. And I'm not necessarily talking about the street population. I mean, I have seen people have some sort of an episode when you didn't identify them with that community. But Jonny, how can we better sort of manage the way we feel when we see people in open distress all the time?
I think it's really important to remember that open distress may not mean that I'm unsafe when I'm seeing it, right? I mean, it's I think when we see things that are distressing or appear different or out of a sense of normality, we can worry. We've done a lot of work with businesses in the local area to really support small business owners in and around how to calmly respond and de-escalate and most importantly connect someone who's experiencing a crisis to care. We, with the support of the province, have this fantastic service run by AVI in Victoria called Circle. Well, it's actually not called that; it's called PACT or Clicker rather. And we can maybe share the number with your team to put on here. It's a brilliant community-based crisis response team. And they've done tremendous work with downtown business owners, other community members. If someone's appearing to be in distress or crisis, they are a great response to go. And they've responded to thousands of calls since they were launched 18 months ago. And we're really grateful. We've avoided the need for police to attend 99% of the time. So this team is de-escalating and diffusing distressing situations in people's homes and on the streets and in community in fantastic way. That's the AVI Clicker crisis response team that's available in Victoria.
Yeah, we'll have that number on screen. Of course, the other factor in the midst of all this on an ongoing basis can be where you work and what that's like. We're going to talk about that next. We are talking about people's well-being concerning this time of year, the weather, the approaching holiday season. Jonny Morris with the Canadian Mental Health Association is with us, and Chris Forrester is the Executive Director of the Island Community Mental Health Association. So, Chris, people that are having a rough time at work, that can just make everything else seem worse, can't it?
So for many people, work life really dominates the greater portion of their waking hours, and so having a safe and predictable and largely joyful place to work is super important for someone's mental health. And so part of that is really finding a place to work that supports the psychological safety in the workplace key factors. There's 13 of them. I couldn't name one off the top of my head. Maybe Jonny can speak more about that. I know that CMHA offers a lot of workplace psychological safety programs. But ultimately, it's about working in an environment that is committed to providing a safe workplace for people.
Yeah, I mean, that's incumbent upon you guys are leaders. I'm a leader. We have to create a healthy, productive workplace. And Jonny, that's incumbent upon the employer.
Yeah, it's so important, and we've been doing lots of work on this lately, and I think it's important to remember, the influence of a supervisor, a boss, or a manager, or supervisor. Research has shown can actually be more impactful than the relationship you have with your partner or your spouse, and so. In so many ways, Bruce, you're right. We set tone. We demonstrate what's acceptable and what's okay. And in our leadership roles, we've got a real opportunity to, as Chris was saying so well there, shape some of the factors in a workplace that can help people feel more psychologically safe, where they feel included, they feel safe to learn, they feel safe to contribute, and also challenge the status quo a bit. We keep reminding employers that it's really important to support your leaders, your people leaders, to recognize if someone on your team's in distress, and to be super clear about where to go for help. And there's actually, I think, a growing conversation amongst workplaces as to the amount of psychological health benefits that people are providing. $500 is a start. But knowing that we don't quite yet have publicly funded counseling in British Columbia, that we're probably the closest we've ever been, it's really, I think, important for employers to think through, can they up-level? Maybe that's something they think through as the season goes forward. Can they up-level with the new benefits year starting in January, the amount of mental health sessions that are available in their extended health plan?
Yeah.
And to support that, I think it's good to note that psychological injury is amongst the highest growing reported injury in the workplace as well. And so, providing a psychological safe workplace and providing the supports that Jonny spoke about really reduce the incident of psychological injury, and that's good for business as well as the people working. So.
There's also that whole it's so obvious, but some people overlook the fact that your diet, exercise, routine, stuff like that can certainly impact your mental health and your well-being, right, Chris?
Absolutely. And we refer to those as the pillars of mental health. If one slips, it's indicative of maybe of where your mental health is at. And if it continues to slip, it'll have a greater cumulative impact on your mental health. So things like sleep, getting 7 to 8 hours a night, working on sleep hygiene, working on your diet. And there's lots of really neat emerging research on diet and how it actually impacts mental health at a far more significant rate than we've ever given it credit for as well. And then, of course, exercise, getting out, walking, doing whatever you can within your ability is so important.
Um, we did a chamber chat about brain injuries a couple of weeks ago because that's increasingly becoming more of a factor. So, Jonny, I'll go back to you. How much of the work that you do involves people who are living with a brain injury?
I think this has been an important issue for some time. There are a number of agencies in BC that are doing such important work around supporting those living with a brain injury. I think it's become more top of mind because of the toxic drug crisis. We are seeing a growing incidence of people who've experienced a toxic drug poisoning, who've been resuscitated and tragically are living now with a brain injury going forward. It's really important because, of course, there's a mental health impact to this too. Living with a brain injury, we often see a linkage and a correlation with mental health problems like depression and anxiety. I mean, ultimately, the brain has been impacted, and it can have mental health impacts as well. So we absolutely care about these issues and are often campaigning to improve the amount of resources that are available for people who might have a serious mental illness and a brain injury and perhaps live with a substance use problem too. And all too often our systems and services aren't quite set up in a way to avoid people falling through the cracks when they live with those three conditions or those three experiences.
Yeah, just to wrap it up, the very important work that you're doing, Chris, how is it funded?
Primarily through Island Health, so that would be through the Ministry of Health, but also in part by BC Housing, the rents that we generate through our housing, and the kind and gracious donations we receive from the public.
And you're the same, Jonny. You get money from different sources, but what's your primary source of funding?
We're very grateful to the province of BC, similarly the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions, MCFD, the Ministry of Social Development and Ministry of Health for their support. We're very grateful to corporate sponsors, a number of, including in Victoria, who've been big supporters along the way. And as Chris is thinking about giving, if you want to give locally to a great agency like Chris's, that's a great place to go. And also at the provincial level, we're very grateful for donations that we receive as well.
So if you are watching or listening to this and you understand you're going to have some issues over the season, don't worry about reaching out to somebody. It's a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness to seek help for that sort of thing. Jonny Morris, Canadian Mental Health Association, all the best to you and your wife for the holidays. Thank you for being with us today.
You too, Bruce.
And Chris Forrester, the Executive Director of the Island Community Mental Health Association. Chris, all the best to you and your family for Christmas as well.
Thank you so much, Bruce, and you as well.
Thank you. I'm Bruce Williams. We'll see you again for another Chamber Chat.